Hello, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane and Hurricane HD video update for Thursday, August 2nd, 2012. The top story obviously continues to be Tropical Depression 5. Here is the 11 a.m. advisory package forecast for the next 5 days. A general west-northwest track into the Caribbean. I am less and less convinced that it'll actually last this long. I think there'll be a gap somewhere in here where it's an open wave, if not longer. This part of the Caribbean Sea is really dangerous for these systems to go through at this time of year. If you recall the points of origin map that I showed and have showed recently, there are no points of origin developments in this area during this time of the year, the first 10 days of August. So if this does not become a tropical storm, yeah, it's a depression now, technically a tropical cyclone, but if it doesn't develop once it gets into here, it may not until it gets up into here. There's just different reasons why this part of the Caribbean Sea is simply not favorable. You have the large landmass to the south, and the cyclones move through and they can draw air in off of South America, which helps to entrain dry air. Yes, it is somewhat drier, even over the Amazon down here. And, I mean, anything over land is certainly drier than over water. And just other factors that go into play that make this part of the Caribbean Sea right here, a lot of people refer to it as the gauntlet. And some cyclones make it through there, but they're usually already formed. You look at Ivan, for example, in 2004. It certainly had no problem moving through there. Dean and Felix in 2007, but they were already well developed. So we shall see, and I'll show you some evidence on the GFS output as to why this may not survive, at least temporarily, and it may come back later. We'll see. So looking at the latest, here it is on satellite picture. Down in the lower right-hand corner, you can see the rest of the Atlantic Basin, at least the western side of it, nice and quiet. A zoomed-in satellite shot. Now, when I see this, it tells me, just from my experience, that we do not have a very well organized system. The reason being, you have these round thunderstorm clusters and not much banding. You don't see that spiral banding very well evidenced on this shot. Maybe a little bit right here. Granted, I'm not looking at all the different microwave imagery. We don't have time to go through all that right here, but just a basic snapshot look on enhanced infrared imagery shows that it's not a very well organized system. It almost looks like a nice sharp tropical wave. Recon's going to fly out there, the Hurricane Hunter aircraft, and they will fly around and tell us if it is in fact an open wave, or is there enough organization under here that it's actually a tropical storm. It could still just be a depression too, of course, but it doesn't look very well organized. Decent outflow, I guess, enough, but this is not the mark of a very well organized system, for sure. And if we look at the wind shear status, it's not too bad. There's an anticyclone sitting right on top of the system, and that means the air is coming out in a clockwise fashion in all directions, at least it should. So that mechanism is there. But there's a pretty strong easterly jet coming through here, a push of air in the mid-levels, kind of tilting the system off, pushing it more in one direction, kind of like if you're walking along and somebody comes up and pushes you on your shoulders and makes you fall down, being top-heavy, if you will. You can't have the wind blow across a tropical cyclone in any one direction. It really needs to fan out in a clockwise pattern. Now, interesting too, the Caribbean Sea, yes, there are westerly winds coming through here. This is what the wind direction is. But those winds are 5 to 10 knots or so. Not very strong, but they are blowing against the grain, if you will. So if this system moves into that, it's going to run head-on into these winds. And if this is moving west at, let's just say, 15 miles per hour, it's moving faster than that, and then you have winds going at 12 miles per hour in the opposite direction, well, that's not very good. Imagine if you're running at breakneck speed at 15 miles per hour and you run into another runner head-on going 12 miles per hour. Not good. So the same thing applies for these tropical systems. They cannot experience any kind of wind shear in the atmosphere or they start to suffer. Notice too, if you can see this, I'll outline it for you, a very large area of cyclonic flow in the atmosphere. This is just very, very negative for development across the Atlantic Basin. A vast area of cyclonic flow all through here, just a huge sinking pattern of converging air and cyclonic flow in the upper levels, not conducive to development. The only region at all that's even favorable is right out here in the deep tropics, and that's why we have tropical depression number 5 taking advantage of that. So let's take a look at the GFS output. This is the very latest, the 12Z run. The model is run 4 times a day, the operational model, and this is the 850 millibar level, or 5,000 feet in the atmosphere, showing relative vorticity. And by that, just generally speaking, we're talking spin or energy in the atmosphere. And to simplify it, the more deeper the colors that we see here on the left that you see inside these vorticity centers, the more energy there is and the more spin the atmosphere has inside of that vorticity center. So that being said, here is TD5 just coming into the frame here. This is valid about right now as I'm doing this video blog. This is valid tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Now notice it's fairly round, not bad, but it does have a little bit of a strange shape to it. It's not completely round. If it were a perfect circle, this is as perfect as I can draw, like that, with lots of little rings in here, tightly packed, and it had a bunch of deep colors inside of it, then it would show me that that's a very strong system. This is still fairly weak. It's got a couple of gradations of color in there, showing increasing vorticity as we go up the scale, but the fact that it does have a little bit of a lobe to it, it's kind of oblong shaped, indicates to me that it is not a very well organized system. Good news, because it will be passing through the Lesser Antilles at this point. Now, even though it's not going to be very strong, you folks down here can expect, obviously, an increase in showers and thunderstorms, brief periods of gusty winds, and a rather unsettled day as this tropical system moves through your region. Going out to 48 hours, again, it still looks fairly healthy. This isn't the worst I've ever seen, but not as organized as one would expect. And this shows me, too, that, again, it's not strengthening much at all as it enters the Caribbean Sea. But watch what happens here when we go out to 72 hours. It starts to fragment, and you get pieces of energy all around it. Some over South America, a little piece here, a little piece here, and this is itself tear-shaped. Wow, it just starts to unravel, and you can even see the shape of it in the wind barbs here, just a large, sharp, curved feature. So this may open up into just a tropical wave by 72 hours. The GFS not depicting a very well-organized system. At 96 hours, even less organized piece of energy sitting over, I think that would be the northern part of Venezuela, if my geography serves me. Here's Colombia. Piece of energy here, a weaker piece where the center of the system would maybe be. Then we have another piece up here near Cuba. It's like, okay, what's going on here? We just have this general, wave. Yeah, it looks like it's still closed off a little bit at the mid-levels. But bottom line, this shows me that by day 4, not very well organized. Then at day 5, it tries to make a little bit of a comeback, though it still has that kind of odd shape to it. But it may be beginning a comeback by the time it reaches the the northwest Caribbean Sea. Now this area also has the highest ocean heat content of anywhere in the Atlantic Basin right now, and we're away from this gauntlet area of the eastern Caribbean Sea. This area of the Caribbean, much more favorable throughout the season, and it may try to make a comeback. In fact, if we move all the way up to the outflow level to 200 millibars, way up high above the storm. We see clockwise flow here all around it with the storm centered right there. Very little to no shear. So if the GFS is right, you have a decent outflow channel perhaps here, maybe another one on the northeast side. This may come under a fairly decent upper level pattern where it can start to strengthen again if it can survive without completely losing its identity through this region right here, which is really hard for them to do, especially these tropical waves that are so well developed. They represent a lot of energy, a lot of heat, but it is going to have to go through this no man's land through here and survive that before it can have a chance to develop in the Northwest Caribbean Sea. Longer range models indicating less ridging over the United States up here, so there may be just enough of an alleyway for this to cut into this region, and then it could go somewhere to Louisiana, all the way into Mexico. So I would say certainly people from New Orleans all the way down into central Mexico want to keep the closest eye on this in the longer range. Everybody should be watching it because you never know. Most of the times they're pretty straightforward and they don't do anything completely wild that the computer models can't pick up on. But for now, the greatest impact will be the islands here in the next 24 to 48 hours, and eventually Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, and possibly the northern Yucatan, and maybe down the road, more than a week out, somewhere along the Gulf Coast region, either Mexico or Louisiana or Texas will have to deal with this beyond the 7-day time period. But that's far enough out in time that we have plenty of time to watch it. All right, went a little long today, but there's a lot to discuss. I want to make sure I explain things as thoroughly as I can, and hopefully you understood it enough to grasp what is going on, that structurally Tropical Depression 5 has a lot of work to do, which is good news because it's going to impact some land areas, and we don't want those impacts to be severe. All right, so there you have it. There's your update today for August 2nd. I will be back here tomorrow. Again, I'm Mark Sudduth, my website, hurricanetrack.com. Always a pleasure to do these videos for Hurricane and Hurricane HD. And with that being said, I'll be back tomorrow with another one.